Ladies and gentlemen, it is I, Hidden Flame. What you're about to see is the redone version of my timeline. Over the last year, I have gone ahead and played every single Final Fantasy game, excluding number 5, over on my livestream channel. I have all the information I need to get a more accurate idea of my timeline. I even completed Shadowbringer on Final Fantasy XIV, and yes, that game will be in my timeline, kind of. So without further ado, I'm going to start my series as I did my original series, with Final Fantasy X and all the connections it has with the other games. For those of you who do not know what the story of Final Fantasy X is, I will give you a brief explanation of what it is. In Final Fantasy X, the main character, Tidus, is playing Blitzball in Zanarkand when something attacks Zanarkand, destroying it and sending him into the future, about 1,000 years. Here he meets various characters who are called Guardians, and one specific character named Yuna, who is a summoner. He joins them on a quest to save Spira, which is the land he has found himself in, against a being called Sin, or Death Incarnate, as it shows up every 10 years, killing everything in sight, until a summoner comes along and defeats him. Along the way, they have to contend against the Temple of Bavel, and one of their leaders, Seymour, who tries to stand in their way in order to sacrifice himself on Yuna's pilgrimage to stop Sin for his own nefarious deeds. Tidus and company defeat Seymour and defeat Sin to bring a peace to Spira, also known as the Calm. In Final Fantasy X-2, it takes place 2 years after the events of the first game, where Yuna decides to go off on her own with her cousin Riku and their friend Pain to become sphere hunters, living a carefree life until they find a sphere which changes how they decide to find spheres. After seeing what's on this sphere, they have to either decide to give it to the Youth League or to New Yevon. Having given it to the Youth League, it causes friction between the people of Spira, either teaming up with New Yevon or the Youth League themselves in a small civil war. It's up to Yuna to calm their fears as the High Summoner who defeated Sin. The sphere that they have found shows a weapon called Vegnagun and a spirit named Shuyan. Shuyan is trying to use Vegnagun as a weapon to destroy Bavel, as they killed him and his summoner Love. Having learned that the machine, or Machina, is under Bavel, Yuna and company decide to go after it. But when they reach the bottom of New Yevon in Bavel, they find that Vegnagun has fled into the far plane. Yuna and company decide to go into the far plane after a brief concert to calm everyone's fears of a civil war. After the concert, they do make it to the far plane, where they fight Vegnagun and Shuyan and stop him. Or do they? As there are 2 different endings to this game. One is where the team decides to fight and defeat Vegnagun and Shuyan. Or 2, they do not defeat Vegnagun in time. Vegnagun releases a weapon, destroying all of Sphera. The canonical ending is the one where they defeat Vegnagun and return home. As a third ending, inside the far plane, Yuna is able to contact Tidus, the character from the first game, and have him be resurrected into Spira so she can reunite with him. In the unreleased Final Fantasy X-3, which only has glimpses in a small audio drama on the international version of the game called Will, it is learned that Spira is still around, so Vegnagun did not destroy Spira. This audio drama takes place a few years after the events of the second game, where Yuna has returned to the temple and people keep coming to her for advice. She learns from a summoner, or a cinder as they are called now, from Bavel, that the dead are returning to life. Investigating this, she learns from going to the Moonflow that not only animals but people are returning to life and joining their loved ones. This startles her, especially when she finds that Sin returns. It is unclear if the summons in the first game they were killed have returned also. The audio drama ends with her saying that she is going to stop Sin, as she is the High Summoner. She did it once, she'll do it again. As we don't know the events following this audio drama, it is assumed that Yuna goes to fight Sin. Whether she is successful or she fails, as Final Fantasy X-3 has never been released. It is speculated that the creators of Final Fantasy X want to make it, but they just haven't yet. So, time for all the connections, as there are a few of them. The first connection is just a silly connection that I thought. It revolves around Lulu and her familiars. Those familiars are Pew Pew, Moomba, Cactuar, Catsith, and Moogle. These dolls, or familiars as someone has told me, are in the same shape and form of creatures in Final Fantasy VIII. If Lulu or someone knows specifically about these creatures, specifically the Moomba and the Pew Pew, who only show up in Final Fantasy VIII via texts, via spheres, somehow they have been recorded and shared to her, where she had them commissioned into these familiars. This, like I said, is just a little silly one, and if true, means 10 takes place after 8. The second connection is a big one, but you have to understand the events of the second game. While not many people like Final Fantasy X-2, there is a bit of lore that needs to be explored. The first connection comes from Shinra, the Albed Whiz kid who likes to invent random things for the Gullwings, Yuna, Riku, and Pain, to use on their adventures. Towards the end of Chapter 5 of Final Fantasy X-2, Shinra is hard at work, working on a device that he thinks will revolutionize Sphera. Yuna approaches him, and the conversation goes as such. Yuna asks him, "What are you doing?" Shinra says, "Looking at fog plane data. The more I study it, the more fascinating it gets. There's limitless energy swirling around in there." Yuna replies, "Limitless energy?" Shinra goes, "The life force that flows through our planet. I think, with a little work, we could probably extract that energy into a usable form. Of course, that could take generations. Think how much Spira would change if we got that to work. Maybe one day we could build a city full of light, one that never sleeps," Yuna says. Shinra replies, "No doubt about it. Where Yuna wants Xanarkin, Shinra is probably thinking Midgar. That's right, Final Fantasy VII. Well, this could just be a little Easter egg that Square Enix threw in. I believe they did this for a reason. It could be that Final Fantasy VII takes place generations after the events of Final Fantasy X. 10. The life force he talks about could be the life stream. The energy could be Mako. The city that lights up, that never sleeps, could be Midgar. Connections are there. You just got to open your mind a little. And also, the kid's name is Shinra. If that's not a clue, I don't know what is.
Our next connection comes from Final Fantasy VI. In Final Fantasy VI, the Espers, also known as summons throughout the series, become crystals or magicite. These magicites are what's left of the summons after they die. They get all of their essence, spells, abilities, whatever, and put them into one usable crystal for the party to use. The party can summon only one at a time, and it's only if that one is equipped. When they unequipped that magicite, they lose the ability to summon. In Final Fantasy X, when Yuna goes into the Chambers of the Fate, all of the Aeons are encased in a crystal-like form. These are the forms that the Aeons have taken after they have sacrificed their lives with the Battle of Sin to become final Aeons, and thus become Aeons for future summoners. This is the only time in all of the games where the summons are acquired from crystal. All of the other games have them acquired by either defeating them in combat or acquiring them from tests. I will come to those at another time. This connection doesn't help place where 10 and 6 go in my timeline, but the next connection will help a little. The next connection comes from Final Fantasy 6, 9, and 14. In Final Fantasy 9, there are 3 statues in the Desert Palace that appear to be an illusion of the Warring Triads. The other statues are demonic creatures called the Promise of the Evil God and the Truth of the Devil, and the middle statue is angelic, and it is named the Illusion of the Goddess. The Warring Triad are 3 gods that are descended from heaven. Feeling one another's power, the gods began a war. The mortals caught them amongst their fightings, and they became espers, and were forced to fight endlessly as slave of the gods. That is a quote in the Esper Caves in Final Fantasy VI. In the Heaven's Ward expansion of Final Fantasy XIV, there is a side quest you can do after completing the expansion, where you can go and fight the Warring Triad. I'm going to read a small little snippet of information about these Warring Triads. While they aren't named the same, it is still sort of familiar about exactly who and what they are. The Warring Triad is a group of 3 primals: Sephiroth, the Fiend, Sophia, the Goddess, and Zurvan, the Demon. They were the first primals of the Allegan Empire, successfully bound, a technology they later used in the construction of Dalamud. They remained bound in Aziz La, presumably inside the flagship of the center of the floating continent. 3 statues in the middle of Aziz La are carved in their likeness, and they are otherwise identical to the appearance of Final Fantasy VI. Archbishop Thornton travels to Aziz La to use the power of the trapped primals to become a god king that would put an end to all conflict. He is defeated by the Warrior of Light, but his activation of Aziz La and his drawing upon the Triad's power begins a process awakening, and Oriange calls upon the Warrior of Light for help. The reason I'm adding this is because in Final Fantasy VI, Kefka does the same thing. He uses the Warring Triad's power for his own ability to try and become a god. But the reason why I'm bringing these guys up is because of a theory that is floating around the internet saying that the original Warring Triad is Yuna, Seymour, and Sin.
The statue of the goddess has a representation of a woman and a sun. The woman is Yuna. The sun at her back is in reference to Titus, who his name means sun. The next statue is a fiend. It's originally called Doom, and Sin is the bringer of destruction, and in essence the fiend left behind by the fate of the final Aeon. Its appearance is similar to Braska's Aeon, with a chaos-like upper body, horns pointing straight up, lower half concealed by gray material. This could represent Sin, and possibly even Yevon itself. The third and final statue is the demon, which is two parts, a human and a beast. Seymour himself is multi-raced, half human, half Guado, while the statue itself could refer to him being able to transform into a large demon, and while being humanoid, it could also refer to, like I said, his multiracial upbringing. It could also refer to that he always has some kind of partner, or it could also refer to that as a humanoid, the demon that he controls could be his Aeon, Amina. Now these are all references in the War of the Magi, which could represent Yuna, Sin, and Seymour as I mentioned before. But in order to make it a more long-term thing, it could be representing Yevon versus Sin versus the Summoners. But seeing as how it started with Yuna Liska and ended with Yuna, I'm going with her. And who is in control of Yevon at the time is Seymour. So now where does this place these in the timeline? Well, as I have mentioned before, 10 and 7, 10 comes before 7 as 7 takes place after 10.
I also mentioned that Final Fantasy VIII comes before Final Fantasy X, with the familiars of Lulu and the creatures of 8. As mentioned with the War of the Triad, 10 is that war, and thus the statues built in 6 are the same ones from 10, the people who have become like faith-type creatures and were sealed in stone. On top of this, at the end of 6, the world is desolated. A lot of empty areas, a lot of dead places, very few towns and cities, but it would only make sense because at the end of 6, the world's pretty much in ruin. And in 7, there isn't much left of the world. There's very few areas left. People are hoping to build. People live in large cities because that's where everybody is. If you venture out of the cities, things are bad. And then on top of that, Final Fantasy VII takes place after 10 because the idea of the Shinra Corporation mining the live stream does come into effect in 10 and comes into fruition in 7. But we can't also forget how in Final Fantasy VI, towards the end of the game, the world is technically in ruins. And in Final Fantasy VII, the world is pretty much dying with a meteor coming in to finish it off. So I put 7 behind 6 because 7's land is pretty much a wasteland with very few places in between And I say that is from the events Kefka did in 6, and it is yet to re-heal itself before the events of 7 takes place.
With all that said, we now have the first 4 games in my timeline set. While I don't know which game I'm going to have set next, I'm going to try and get the Warriors of Light into the timeline, because that was another popular video that you guys liked. Also, the Evilly story, I might add that one in too. If you have any issues with the timeline as it sits, please let me know in the comments below. If you have any suggestions on additions to the timeline, please let me know. And if you have a contradiction, or if you found a flaw in my theory, please also let me know, and I will dig into the research of them. I do have another 10 to 12 videos to sort through to try to figure out what I need to modify, what I need to update. So please let me know if you have any addendums you would like me to add. Okay, before I end this video, I would like to thank everyone who's offered every suggestion that they have, any advice that you guys have offered, and even criticism to all the videos I have done in the past. I'm going to try to get these out quicker than I did the last ones. I spent about 1.5 years getting it complete and finding that there were issues with it towards the end, and having technical issues such as sound and vocals not being clear, too loud, me eating my mic, me being too far from my mic. I want to thank you guys all for all the feedback, and hopefully my new setup will allow for a better sounding set. So please let me know if there is issues with my sound. I will take any and all comments, criticisms, questions, insults, whatever you want to give me down in the comments below. And lastly, I do want to thank everybody for looking at the video, listen to me ramble. If you guys would be so kind as to share this with your friends, to send it to whoever you think would enjoy watching this, whoever you think would be given better input. I would gladly accept any and all new subscribers, even if they were to help me improve upon my timeline. And I know, like I don't remember if I said anything, but people keep telling me that the timeline there is no timeline. It's all based on different dimensions. And that's where the Final Fantasy XIV crossover or implementation into the timeline is. As in the new Shadowbringer, it explains all that. So I will be getting to that one in its own video. I'm not sure exactly when, but I will do my best to get that actually into the timeline. So please be patient, guys, as I have a new editing program that will take me some time to figure out, to learn a little bit more, and hopefully I will have another video up soon. Hopefully one a month. I'm not going to try to hold them for once every 2 months, but it all just really depends on my schedule. One last thing, if you guys put something in the comments, please be respectful. No insults, no kill yourselves, no hate speech, none of that. I don't want to see any of that in my comments, as if I do see it, I will block and or report the comment. So please be nice in the comments. With that said, go ahead and finish watching the fight here, as there's nothing left for me to say besides please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.